Life is so beautiful, and life is so hard.
7 words. Kate Bowler said them after the worst news of her life. At 35, a new baby at home, the career she had worked for, the marriage she had dreamed of, she was told she had stage 4 cancer. And the remarkable thing is what she did not say. Not everything happens for a reason. Not stay positive. Not I will beat this. Just life is so beautiful and life is so hard, both at the very same time. How does a person arrive at a sentence like that? How do you look directly at the thing you cannot control and keep living, fully anyway? That is the question underneath everything today, because the answer is not wishful thinking. It has roots in the brain. Welcome to TEDMED Now, where science and story inspire curiosity. I'm your host, Kelly Thomas. There is news that splits a life in two. A phone call, a scan, a voice that says, "Can you come in?" Before and after. This season, we have been asking what resilience really means. We followed endurance with Diana Nyad. We sat inside pressure with Sian Bylock. We got curious about our own habits with Judson Brewer. And we made room for joy with AJ Jacobs. Each of those stories carried a quiet promise that with enough effort, enough training, enough attention, we can shape what happens to us. But what happens when we cannot? What happens when the news is not a challenge to train for, but a fact we cannot change? Today, we turn to Kate Bowler. She was living the life she had worked for, married to her high school sweetheart, a new baby boy, the academic job she had dreamed of, and then a physician's assistant called to tell her she had stage 4 cancer. Here is the part you cannot make up. Bowler is a historian, and her subject was the belief that good things happen to good people. She studies a strand of American Christianity she calls the prosperity gospel. The conviction that if you are good enough, faithful enough, disciplined enough, you can secure your own good fortune. She spent a decade studying the idea that we can control our fate. And then life called that idea's bluff. So today's question is not how do we push harder? It's a bit harder to sit with. How do we build resilience when control is taken away? How does the brain meet news it cannot fix and still find a way to keep living? A note before we begin. We are going to talk about cancer and about death, not to frighten, but because Bowler refuses to look away, and what she found in that hard place, improbably, is full of beauty.
And all I could think of to say was, but I have a son. I can't end. This world can't end. It has just begun.
I cannot end is not a medical sentence. It is the sound of a mind reaching for control and finding none. And that reach is not a weakness. It is biology. Our brains are built to want control, not as a preference, but as a drive. Researchers who study this have a memorable way of putting it. In a sense, we are born to choose. Their finding is striking. The simple opportunity to exercise control, just to choose, engages reward and motivation circuitry in the brain, including in the ventral striatum. The feeling of being at the wheel registers biologically as valuable before we even know how the choice turns out. And the reverse can be true too. When control is taken away, the brain can begin to register that loss as a threat. Across decades of research, humans and animals exposed to stress they cannot control tend to fare worse than those handed even some sense of agency. Agency is one of the nervous system's buffers against stress. So when devastating news arrives, it does not only deliver bad information, it can strip away something the brain treats as deeply valuable, the sense that we are steering our own lives. Part of the shock inside "I cannot end" is a nervous system registering a sudden, total loss of control.
But despite telling myself, I'm just studying this stuff, I'm nothing like them, when I got my diagnosis, I suddenly understood how deeply invested I was in my own Horatio Alger theology.
Here is what makes Bowler's story bigger than Bowler. She studied the belief that good people are rewarded and was certain she was immune to it. She was not, and neither, really, are the rest of us. Because the need for control does not only live in reward circuits, it shapes the stories we tell. If I eat well, if I am kind, if I work hard, then I will be safe. It is a quiet bargain most of us are running, whether we would say it out loud or not. And it is the brain doing exactly what it evolved to do. Find the pattern, predict the outcome, stay in control. That bargain can work. Bowler says her version served her well. It drove her to dream big and abandon fear, right up until the moment it did not, until the news arrived that no amount of goodness could have prevented. And that collision between a brain wired for control and a life that will not always cooperate is where the real work of resilience begins.
I had to face the fact that my life is built with paper walls, and so is everyone else's. We are all a breath away from a problem that could destroy something irreplaceable or alter our lives completely.
There is a loss hidden inside every diagnosis that we almost never name. Not only the loss of health or time or the future you had pictured, the loss of knowing. Before, Bowler could tell herself a story about what came next, the long life watching her son grow up. After, that story collapses into one relentless question. What will the next scan say? She has described it as living scan to scan. And here is what the science says about that particular kind of suffering. The not knowing is not just a side effect of the ordeal. It may be the main event. Your brain, at its core, is a prediction machine. It is always running a model of what comes next so it can prepare, so it can keep you safe. When it can predict, it settles. When it cannot, it braces. In one clever and slightly diabolical experiment, people played a game in which turning over certain rocks might deliver an electric shock. Sometimes the odds were clear. Sometimes they were a coin flip. And the people under the most stress, measured by their own reports, by the cortisol in their saliva, by the dilation of their pupils, and by the sweat on their skin, were not simply the ones who knew a shock was coming. In that experiment, the 50-50 chance was more stressful than knowing for certain whether the shock was coming or not. Sit with that for a second. Certainty, even certainty about something painful, let the body settle more than uncertainty did. It was uncertainty that kept the alarm ringing. That is the physiology of scan to scan. It is why we don't know yet can be harder to carry than almost any answer a doctor could give you. So when Bowler says her life is built with paper walls, that we are all a breath away, she is not being morbid. She is naming out loud the uncertainty the rest of us spend enormous energy trying not to see. And naming it, it turns out, is where resilience starts. Because if we cannot make the walls any thicker, if we cannot force certainty, and we cannot control the outcome, there is still one thing the brain can change. The story it tells about what is happening.
I asked, how do you live without quite so many reasons for the bad things that happen?
When something terrible happens to someone, most of us reach for the same thing, a reason. Everything happens for a reason, there is a plan. It will make sense someday. We say it to comfort, but Bowler, who studied this belief for a living, calls it a lie. A well-meaning one, but still a lie. Because look at what it actually does. It asks the person who is suffering to carry our discomfort for us, to make their tragedy tidy enough that we can bear to look at it. Bowler saw that reflex up close while she was still in the hospital people kept offering her husband the very same line.
They tell my husband, while I'm still in the hospital, that everything happens for a reason, and then stammer awkwardly when he says, "I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear the reason my wife is dying."
There is a difference between two things that can look identical from the outside. One is a false reason handed to us, what is sometimes called toxic positivity. The other is reframing from the inside, genuinely changing how we hold an experience. Psychologists call it reappraisal, and unlike the platitude, it can leave a measurable mark on the brain. Reframing is not the same as pretending. In the brain, healthy reappraisal does not erase the threat. It changes how the mind relates to it. In a meta-analysis that pulled together 48 brain imaging studies of reappraisal, the pattern was consistent. When people deliberately reframe an emotional experience, they engage cognitive control regions, including areas of the prefrontal cortex, and modulate activity in the amygdala, one of the brain's key threat detection systems. Changing the story you tell can measurably change the brain's emotional response. And there is an even simpler move that can help: naming the feeling. Putting feelings into words, labeling them, can quiet activity in the amygdala and recruit prefrontal regions. Researchers call it affect labeling. Say, "I am terrified," and some of the terror's grip can begin to loosen. Now look at what Bowler did. She did not swallow her diagnosis in silence, and she did not dress it up in a reason. She wrote it down, first in an op-ed, then in a book. That is not the same as a laboratory task, of course, but it points toward the same human capacity, putting the unbearable into language. But here is the crucial part, the thing that separates her reframing from the lie she rejects. Bowler does not reframe by inventing a reason. She reframes by releasing the demand for one. She does not say, "This is secretly good." She says, "Life is so beautiful and life is so hard," both at once. She holds the contradiction instead of resolving it. That is not denial. That is reappraisal in its most honest form. And it points to what healthy reframing of devastating news actually is. Not "this happened for a reason," not "look on the bright side," something sturdier. "This is true, and I still get to choose how I meet it." That is a kind of resilience the brain can genuinely build. And building that resilience can change how we carry the hardest things. We have seen that reframing can turn down the alarm in the moment, but the deeper finding is what happens with practice. When people practiced reappraisal over several sessions, they got measurably better at it. The relief grew with repetition, the way any skill can. And in another study, images that people had deliberately reframed several times still produced a quieter amygdala response a full week later, long after the reframing was done. That is the headline hiding inside the science. Reframing is not only a moment of relief. Practiced over time, it can leave a longer lasting mark on how the brain responds later. Every time you meet a hard truth with, "This is real and I can meet it differently," you're not only calming this moment, you are practicing the circuit that will meet the next one. You can hear that practice in Bowler. "Life is so beautiful and life is so hard" is not a single flash of insight. It is a stance she has practiced, scan after scan, for years. Which means resilience is not something you simply have or you do not. It is something you build, one honest reframe at a time.
When I was sure that I was going to die, I didn't feel angry. I felt loved. I felt like I was floating on the love and prayers of all those who hummed around me like worker bees, bringing me notes and socks and flowers and quilts.
So take it all away, the control, the certainty, the reasons. Strip a person down to the hardest night of their life, what is left? Bowler's answer surprised even her. She expected to feel angry. What she felt was loved. She describes floating on the love and prayers of the people who supported and surrounded her. The feeling was so strong that she started to panic at the thought of losing it. And it is tempting to file that under lovely sentiment and move on. But it is not only sentiment, it is mechanism. In one study, researchers gave people uncomfortable bursts of heat while they looked at photographs, sometimes of a stranger, sometimes of an object, and sometimes of someone they loved. When they looked at the picture of someone they loved, they reported less pain, and their brains confirmed it. Activity dropped in regions that register pain and threat, and a region tied to feeling safe, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, came online. In that study, a loved one, even just pictured, worked on the brain like a safety signal. Connection is not only a metaphor for safety. To the nervous system, it can be safety. Bowler was told the loving feeling would fade, recede, she says, like the tides, but that it would leave an imprint. And it did. Connection does not cure anything. It does not make the walls less paper thin, but it changes what the nervous system has to carry. We are, it turns out, built to be carried.
Life is so beautiful, and life is so hard.
Not beautiful instead of hard, not hard, but secretly for a reason. Both at the same time, unresolved and somehow still livable. This is the hardest kind of resilience we have talked about all season. Not endurance, poise under pressure, curiosity, or joy, but the capacity to keep living and to keep loving when you cannot control the outcome at all. Bowler calls it learning to live without counting the cost. The brain wants control, it wants certainty, it wants reasons. And sometimes life grants none of them. What it leaves us with is smaller and truer, the ability to reframe without lying, to name what is real and to reach for one another. Each of those, we now know, leaves a fingerprint in the brain. And Bowler is still living this all these years later. In her book, Joyful Anyway, she draws a line between two things we tend to confuse. Happiness depends on circumstances going right. Joy is sturdier, a way of recognizing that life can still be worth loving, even when it is fragile, unfinished, and full of sorrow. Notice what that is underneath. It is the same reframe, grown roots. Not everything is fine, not a reason that explains the pain away. Just this is true, and there is still beauty here worth turning toward. She even makes it a promise. You will never be cured of grief, but you can be joyful anyway. The one piece of prosperity gospel Bowler says she still believes in is this.
I believe that in the darkness, even there will be beauty and there will be love. And every now and then, it will feel like more than enough.
When life hands us news we cannot fix, the world may rush to fill the silence with reasons, with bright sides, with everything happens for a reason. We are allowed to set all of that down. We were never going to think our way back into control. That was never the assignment. What is ours is smaller and harder and real. Name what is true. Hold the hard and the beautiful in the same hand. Let people carry us. None of it makes the walls any less paper thin, but it changes what we have to carry and who is carrying it with us. So if today is a beautiful day, let it be beautiful. And if it is a hard day, or both at once, may we find, even there, that we are not alone in it. Next time, our season finale, we have spent 5 episodes pulling resilience apart. Endurance, pressure, curiosity, joy, and now the courage to keep loving without control. In the finale, we put the pieces back together. Because resilience is not a single trait you either have or you do not. It is many traits woven together, and the science says every one of them can be built. We will bring back every voice from this season and ask the question underneath all of them. How do we actually become more resilient? Not in theory, but in the ordinary days that quietly ask it of us. Thank you for listening to TEDMED Now. I'm Kelly Thomas. Until next time.